Welcome to Season 7, Episode 7 of COMMCast. I'm your host, Sean Vang. COMMCast is a production of the Longwood University Communication Studies Department and the COM 434 COM Lab class. This show is dedicated to highlighting the Longwood and Farmville communities, and today's episode is about a Longwood alumni who is setting the stage for Longwood Theater's latest production. Let's get started. Joining us on set today is Dr. Toby Emert, a professor of theater and co-chair of the Department of Creative Arts at Agnes Scott College. Thank you, Dr. Emert, for joining us today.
I'm happy to be here.
So, you happen to be an alumni of Longwood University, so could you tell us a little bit about your experience while attending Longwood, and what did you study while at Longwood?
I'll start with what I studied. So I came in as an English education major. I had some funding to attend the college specifically to study to be an English teacher. And then I also minored in theater, and I was heavily involved in the Department of Theater at the time. I think it was called the Department of Speech and Theater when I was here, and was heavily involved in productions from the very beginning, and then ultimately became the president of what was Longwood Players at the time. So I had a terrific 4 years at Longwood.
Did you see any sort of overlap between English and theater?
Yeah, absolutely. Partially because of the kind of text work that you do in English. So reading plays, for example, that was one of the things I learned to do here, was to read closely. And then ultimately, when I was a teacher in the classroom, I was really interested to have my students also read plays. So when I went to teach, my first year of teaching was in Virginia Beach City Public Schools in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I taught 7th grade English and Drama 1, which was a high school class for 9th graders. Wow. And so there's always been for me a sort of very specific interest in the world of performance and also production, but certainly performance, and then in text, in the world of reading as well.
That's very interesting. I like how those two sort of overlap. So you've actually been in the theater space for quite some time. So what was it that originally got you into theater? Was there some sort of specific moment that got you interested in it?
I think I was always interested in art, generally, in the arts. And so as a student here, I took classes in almost all of the sort of arts disciplines. I took visual arts classes, and I took theater classes, and I took music classes, et cetera. So that's always been a part of my life. When I was a little kid, in 2nd grade, my mom bought me this little book, like a school book, to record things about yourself as you move through your school career. And I didn't keep up with the booklet, but in 2nd grade, I had written in it, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'd written artist and teacher. So from a very early age, I had these two kind of specific interests that always stayed together. And so that was something that was true when I was here, and it was something that played out as I moved away from here and started my career. So I was always interested in performance work, and I started as a teacher of drama, and then I was a performer as well. I spent a year studying professionally as an actor and did quite a lot of stage work. And these days, I'm doing more hybrid work, so my work for the stage often includes other kinds of things like projections. I'm working on a small, short experimental film right now, so that the world that sort of I was led into here has expanded as I've moved throughout my career.
Wow, sounds like you've got a lot going on. And speaking of that, you actually have an impressive academic catalog as well. You got your PhD, and so could you tell us about your journey from Longwood to Tennessee to UVA?
Sure, it was circuitous. So I started as a classroom teacher. As I said earlier, I taught English and theater for several years. And then I went back to school and I got a master's degree in administration. And I spent a few years as a college administrator I was at the University of Texas in Austin. And then ultimately I decided that I missed studying literature. And so I went back to school. Probably, when did I do that? Maybe 10 years or so after my graduation from Longwood. I went back to graduate school. And my intention at the time was to get my PhD and become a literature professor, an English professor. And when I got started in the program at Tennessee, I had a very good experience there. But I got interested in other things. My interests have always been broad, and I became interested especially in the idea of entrepreneurship. And so I took a little break and I opened a coffee house as a way of promoting the idea of a generous space for artists. So for example, the coffee house had monthly exhibitions of local artists, et cetera. And then ultimately, I was working at the University of Virginia and decided, okay, I had this dream, even when I was an undergraduate, that I wanted to be a college professor or university professor. So I went back to school to do my PhD work. And then later I did an MFA in acting and directing as well. So I would have that that kind of credential for the work I do now.
Wow. So now you're a professor of theater at Agnes Scott College, and you're the co-chair of the Department of Creative Arts. So what was it that got you into teaching at the collegiate level?
So I was always interested in that, as I mentioned earlier, and when I finished my PhD, I started applying, and I got a job at the University of Kentucky, and I worked there for a little bit. And then this job at Agnes Scott came open, and I applied and ultimately ended up getting the job. It moved me into a slightly different kind of area because my work at Kentucky was specifically in English education. And so when I moved to Agnes Scott, I had the opportunity to sort of expand the kinds of courses I would teach and the kind of work I would do. My work in my PhD was on this Brazilian theater activist named Augusto Boal, who developed something called Theater of the Oppressed, which for those folks who are watching who know anything about pedagogy, there's a Brazilian pedagogue named Paulo Freire who talked about essentially the democratization of education. So how do we make education accessible and easy for everybody to get to? And Boal had this idea of using theater to do the same kind of thing, not to just have people have access to theater, but also to use theater as a tool to understand the world around them and then to change the world, to make it better. So when I was studying for my PhD and I wrote my dissertation, I was looking specifically at how Boal's work could be adapted for work specifically in the classroom. And then ultimately, my work for the stage led to me doing much more traditional work, sort of like the work that I'm doing here with Million Bazillion, but also always incorporating Boal's idea of democratization, like how do we make the stage accessible for anyone, not just for somebody who's especially trained, but for anybody who's interested.
Okay. So I want to transition into the little program that you created for children. So you developed a program that teaches theater to children of refugee families. Could you tell us about what inspired this and how you went about it?
Yes, okay. That's a good story. I work in Decatur, Georgia. Agnes Scott College is in Decatur, Georgia. That's just right outside the city center of Atlanta, about 6 miles from Atlanta. There is, within 5 miles of our campus, a small town called Clarkston, Georgia. And in the 1970s, late 1970s and early 1980s, Clarkston became a relocation center for refugee families, probably for a number of reasons. One, it had easy access to public transportation. There's a rail system in Atlanta, and there was easy access to the rail system. There was affordable housing, and it was close to a major city, Atlanta. And over the course of the last 3 or 4 decades, Clarkston has become, it's been called the most cosmopolitan square mile in the country. Wow. Because of the range of people who have immigrated or migrated there from all over the world. Most of the people who have come are refugees. And a refugee is a very specific kind of designation for somebody who is migrating to the U.S. They have a special kind of entrance into the country, and they have dispensation of certain kinds of rules for other immigrants. So one of the things that happens for refugees when they come to the country is often they come with children. And the children almost always have had some kind of interrupted education. So nobody just leaves their home country and comes straight to the United States as a refugee. They've always been somewhere else. Often it's another country, sometimes it's in a camp. And in those other places, the children have had some access to education, but usually not much. Because of the college's proximity to Clarkston, there was a school there that asked us to be involved with thinking about how we could make a more helpful curriculum for the students. And as a result of that, I got involved with an organization called the Fugees. The Fugees is still around. It was a soccer team, especially for refugee kids. And one of the things that the coach of that team, named Luma Mufle, discovered is that the kids needed a kind of all-around support system, which included education. And just through sort of a series of connections, they found me and asked me to think about developing a summer program. And so we did. We developed we called it a boot camp originally. And the idea was that the kids would spend about 6 weeks with us on the campus in the summer, and they would really increase their literacy skills in particular. And in order to do that, I pulled on all the things I know about performance and about engagement and about how theater has a kind of rounded set of possibilities when somebody's involved with it, and how it touches on all kinds of skills that are literate. reading and writing and speaking and performing, etc., and listening. And so we use theater as kind of a touchstone for the curriculum that we developed for those kids. And I did that for about 10 years, working in that summer camp with the refugee kids.
Oh, that's really cool. I like that.
It was unexpected, and it was pretty extraordinary. I am very grateful to have had that experience working with those kids.
So now I want to pivot to your work in theater productions. So how did you pivot from being on stage to being behind the stage in terms of production?
Well, I think like many people who are involved in theater, when I was first involved, even when I was a student here at Longwood, I was very interested in acting. I was very interested in performance. And I still enjoy that at some level. But at some point in the process, I became very interested in directing, in imagining what we could do with the words that are on this page and how we could turn them into something else. And as a result of the interest, I started trying to get opportunities for myself to do directing. When I was teaching, that was part of my role, to direct work for young audience members in particular. And so that's become much more the role that I play now. I'm much more a director and a producer. I play that role as well, so maybe somebody else is the director, but I'm helping to manage everything that goes on with the show. I really love that. I love trying to imagine how we could take those words and turn them into a story that people are going to be interested to see.
So speaking of directing, your latest production is actually for Longwood's theater program called Million Bazillion the Musical. Could you tell us a little bit about what this production is and why you chose to create a production based off of a kids podcast?
I can do that. So I had an idea maybe 5 or 6 years ago that I wanted to, because of my training, build a show for young audiences, for kids, elementary kids in particular. That's who I was thinking about as my audience at the time, that offered them a theatrical experience, but also taught them something. And my original idea was maybe I would build a show called Food Fight, and it would be about nutrition. And all of the scenes of the show would be these interactive moments or games or competitions or puzzles that the kids had to solve with the actors, with the characters in the play, that would ultimately teach them about how to eat better. And I still think that's a decent idea, and I might go back to that at some point. But I was listening to the National Public Radio on my way home from work one afternoon, and there's a show, some of the folks in your audience may know this show, it's called Marketplace. It's a 30-minute show about the economy on NPR every afternoon. And at the end of that particular episode, the host said, "Take a listen to our new podcast for kids, Million Bazillion."
Ooh.
And I'd never heard of that, of course, and I thought, okay. So I just, on a lark, essentially, as I was doing a walk one day, I queued up that podcast and I started listening to it. And I listened to the first 3 or 4 episodes. The first season was 6 episodes. And what they had done in the podcast is they had tried to, in a lot of ways, dramatize the ideas, the concepts that they wanted kids to understand. So for example, if folks come to the show, one of the concepts that we're trying to teach kids about is taxes, which is not that's not that easy for adults to understand, right? And so what they had done in the episode is they had tried to generate a story that would allow kids to dig deeply into understanding this pretty sophisticated concept. And as I listened to the podcast, I thought, this could be translated for the stage. It would take some work, but it could be done. And so I went onto LinkedIn and found the host of the podcast and emailed them, messaged them, not expecting really that they would get back to me. But they did. So one of the hosts got back to me and said, "I'm not the guy for you to be in touch with because I don't make any of these decisions, but I'll put you in touch with the production team," which he did. And so I pitched the idea, and I think they were surprised because I don't think they had considered the idea of how the show might translate for the stage, but they were definitely interested in what that could be. So that was in, I think, 2020 when we first had that conversation. We had to then go get some funding to make the show, and so with a colleague who is a neuroscientist, we applied for a research in the arts grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, which we ultimately were able to get, which allowed us to both produce the show originally in 2024 and build, make, and produce the show, and then also do some preliminary research on, do kids actually get the concepts of the show based on the information that we're offering them through these scenes that we develop. So our preliminary data says, yes, they got at least some of the concepts that we were working on. So that's how it got started. This is the second production. So the Longwood production is the second production. So I'm really excited to be working on it here.
Can't wait to see it. I'm definitely going to see it. So for our very last question, this is your grand return to Longwood University. So how does it feel to be back in Farmville? And what inspired you to return to Longwood for this production?
So I grew up near here, and my family is still here. I grew up on a farm about 10 or 15 miles from here, and so my family is still here. So I get to come back to this area with some regularity. So that's nice. And then about 10 years ago, I thought, oh, since I'm there a lot, maybe I'll buy a house. So I bought a house as well, which is, I was talking to you earlier about my garden. Right. My garden is there. So I'm here partially because I know this area and I'm familiar with this area, but also when I knew that I was going to have a sabbatical this semester, I approached the theater folks to say, okay, so I'm going to be on sabbatical. Any interest in having me come to do a directorship while I'm there? And if so, what about if we think about doing Million Bazillion? And so they were amenable to that. So that's how it happened.
Wow. So that was our final question, but let's take a quick break and we'll be back with COMMCast. It's time for everyone's favorite segment, COMMCast Trivia. We have for you some Million Bazillion themed trivia questions in increasing difficulty. So
Okay.
Are you ready?
Let's try it.
Okay, so question 1. There are 4 main characters featured in Million Bazillion, the musical. Can you name all 4?
I can. Shall I?
Yes.
There's Benny, Bridget, Ronnie, and Jay.
You got all of them correct. Now question 2. In which American city is the U.S. Mint located?
Well, it's in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia is correct. Now, question 3. In the production, what is the name of the character's 3rd grade teacher?
Miss Grizzle.
Miss Grizzle is the correct answer. And question 4. In the final scene of the production, the main characters sing a song summarizing their newly learned vocabulary. What is the full name of this song?
The Hee-Haw, Yee-Haw summary song.
That is correct. Now for our final question. This is the hardest one.
All right.
Occurring 4 times in the show, the characters say a repeated portmanteau, a term that blends 2 words into 1 word. What is this portmanteau?
So this is a term I made up. It is a term that becomes one of the characters' Benny's favorite words. It's precise exactly.
Precise exactly is the correct answer. So thank you to Dr. Emert for joining us today, and thanks to everyone with CommLab behind the scenes, and thank you for watching. Join us live next Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. on YouTube for another episode of CommCast.